So thanks for joining. Um, I don't really have a long presentation prepared. I sent out the letter, which I wrote this week after meeting with the elders last Sunday, basically discussing all of this. Um, and so hopefully everybody's had a chance to read it. If not, that's okay. I'm going to start off by reading through it, but I might stop as I'm going through and expand a little bit on on the different ideas. And then when we're done, the main purpose of this was to give anyone and everyone a chance to ask questions. If you think that this is all ridiculous, you can tell me why and we can discuss it. If you just have a question about the virus and how it, whatever, I'll do my best to try and answer it. It's just to give everybody an opportunity to kind of be on the same page. We're a family, and it's a little bit difficult since we can't congregate to disseminate information perfectly. So this seemed like a good way after sending out the letter and reading through it to just give people an opportunity to ask questions. So I think with the Zoom, the most efficient way to have people ask their questions would be to use the chat function. On your computer, it should be at the bottom center of your page, and you can hit that, and you can either type a question in and I can read it and then try and answer it, or if you would like to ask your question orally, just write your name there. That'll be the equivalent of raising your hand, and we'll just go through them one at a time, and I'll unmute you and give you a chance to ask your questions, and I'll try and answer it, and we can have whatever dialogue we need. And we'll take as much time as we need to. And if you get tired, won't hurt my feelings if you just drop off. Looks like we're up to 45 logins. So we'll go ahead and get started. Like I said, I'm going to read through the letter, expand on it a little bit, and then allow a chance for questions. So, dear church family, 2 months ago, I stood before you and explained why it was important that we take SARS-CoV-2, the novel coronavirus, seriously. I explained why we needed to isolate ourselves, cease congregating, and move to online worship services. We needed to flatten the curve to prevent overwhelming the healthcare system. Mission accomplished. The curve has been flattened, so why can't we resume meeting at the building for corporate worship? So I've heard a lot of, I think there's a lot of misunderstanding out there as to what the purpose of isolating ourselves and shutting things down for the 2 months was. Yes, it was to flatten the curve. It was to keep the hospital system from being overwhelmed, but that wasn't the only purpose. And I've heard a lot of angry comments on social media in different places with people saying, well, the hospital systems weren't overwhelmed. Why don't we just open everything back up and go about our business? Well, one of the reasons the hospital system wasn't overwhelmed is because we changed the way we went about our lives. That could, if we went back to living exactly like we were in January and February, we could very easily overwhelm our hospital system again. So we have to continue to keep that in mind. But it served several other purposes. So, and the second paragraph, I say, shutting down society and flattening the curve accomplished several things. One, it alerted everyone to the seriousness of the situation. I don't think everybody understood how serious it was. And when you saw the president and governors and county commissioners saying, we're closing businesses, you have to stay home, the school districts shutting down. I mean, the school districts were the first ones to take this seriously. It got everyone's attention. Now, not everybody agreed with that. Not everybody thinks that was the right thing to do, and that's certainly worthy of debate. But it was an important step, to get everyone's attention. It was kind of like yelling fire when there's a fire. Number two, it slowed the spread of the virus. I think that's for sure. The healthcare system was not overwhelmed, as we mentioned. And then number four, hospitals, businesses, other organizations, which includes churches, schools, which have not opened back up, and individuals were able to prepare themselves for reopening in a safer manner. I will tell you, in the hospital, had we been hit hard, like say New York City was, without those 2 months to prepare, it would have been disastrous. I mean, part of the reason, people will say that in New York City, they didn't run out of ICU beds, although I think some hospitals did. In the state, in the city, they didn't run out of ICU beds, and they didn't run out of ventilators. They didn't have to take somebody off a ventilator to make room for somebody else. But no doubt about it, they were overwhelmed. They had doctors who weren't trained to take care of critically ill patients, taking care of patients in the ICU. They were overwhelmed. That's why a lot of doctors, a lot of nurses got sick. They weren't prepared with all the PPE or the personal protective equipment to protect themselves. And so there was a lot of illness and death that potentially would have been preventable had they had more time to prepare. So in cities, unlike, not Seattle got overwhelmed, New York City got overwhelmed, the rest of the country pretty much had an opportunity to prepare themselves. And so now we're prepared. We now know how to take care of these patients, how to isolate them. We've basically been running, drills in the hospital for 2 months, preparing for how to take care of these patients, and they continue to trickle in. And if we continue to be smart about how we reopen society, we won't be overwhelmed, and people won't necessarily die who potentially could be prevented. The third paragraph, what it did not do is decrease the risk of becoming infected by the virus in the community. In fact, it may be more dangerous now than it was 2 months ago. Until we have an effective treatment, a widely available vaccine, or the virus mutates into a less deadly form, we will not be able to safely return to life as we knew it before the shutdowns. So a couple of words about that. I think there's a misconception among a lot of people in our community that we flattened the curve, we won, the virus is taken care of, we should be going about our business and not worrying about that. We've done nothing to mitigate the risk of this virus. The virus is still there, it still is deadly, it's spreading in our community. And if we don't take measures to protect ourselves as we reopen society, people will get infected. We do not have a treatment that will just stop the virus and kill it and stop it in its tracks. There's one treatment, now I'm going to have trouble saying it while I'm here, Remdesivir, that has shown some marginal improvement. It did decrease deaths. It did decrease the amount of time people were sick and people were in the hospital, but it's not a miracle cure. People still died who got the medication. And until we have a treatment that someone gets it, they take it, it ends it, we don't have an effective treatment. You still won't want to get sick. It still won't be, the magic bullet we're looking for. And I'm not convinced we're ever going to have a magic bullet treatment like that. What about a vaccine? Well, they're working on a vaccine. Vaccines take a long time to develop. The problem is, while you're developing a vaccine, viruses mutate and they change. And so the vaccine may not be as effective on the next form of this virus as it mutates. Even if we were to get a vaccine today, one that was effective, how long would it take to produce and distribute 330 million copies of that vaccination? I mean, that in and of itself could take years. So getting a vaccine is not going to happen anytime soon. Getting everyone treated is not, or vaccinated in the short term is not going to happen very soon. Ultimately, I think this virus is going to do what other viruses have done. It's going to run its course. It's going to, over time, it's going to mutate. Historically, viruses don't mutate into more deadly forms of themselves. They tend to become less dangerous, less lethal. With the flu pandemic of 1918, it turned into H1N1, which is still a serious virus, but not nearly as deadly as the original flu, the Spanish flu, or as deadly as what we're dealing with right now. So my best educated guess is this virus is just going to run its course. It's going to become a weaker virus, and we're just going to have to learn to live with it. And you've probably heard the term herd immunity. In the last sentence of this paragraph, I say achieving herd immunity via organic spread of the disease would likely result in over 1 million COVID deaths. Right now, we're at about 100,000 deaths from COVID. And it's debatable how accurate that number is. There are those out there that think that number is being overestimated, and there are those out there that think that it's underestimated because there are people dying probably of COVID who haven't been tested. I think the number is probably fairly representative. I mean, there's just no doubt about it that more people are dying right now than normally die in our country or across the earth. At this time of the year, in this period of time. South America, which does not have nearly the resources we have, I read somewhere recently, they're documenting 5 times the normal deaths right now that they normally have. Now, they don't have the resources to test everybody, but presumably the bulk of that is related to this virus ravaging those countries. So it's hard to doubt the seriousness and the morbidity and mortality that this virus is wreaking across the planet. So like I said before, what we have to do is we have to learn how to live with the virus. A lot of things I've seen out there on social media, people who are angry, who says, you know what, I can't live in fear. I'm not going to live in fear. I just have to go out and live my life. Well, personally, I think that's a pretty ridiculous attitude to have. This virus is something to be feared. We don't have to live at home in a cocoon, not going about living our lives. What we have to do is we have to adapt. We have to learn to live with the virus. We have to, I'll talk a little bit more about how we do that. But this is Mother Nature. We can't it's not just about our attitude towards this virus. It's not that I'm scared of this virus and fear is the problem. If I'm scared, that's the problem. No, the problem is this virus is real and it kills people. It makes people very sick. Most people survive, but a lot of people are dying. One analogy you might think of would be like another natural disaster. Think about a tornado or a hurricane. Acting like this virus we should just go about our business without adapting our lifestyle at all is like a Category 5 hurricane heading to Galveston and people heading out saying, I'm just going to go to the beach and wait for this hurricane. I'm not scared of it. I'm not scared. I'm just going to go to the beach, and because I'm not scared, it's not going to hurt me. Well, that's kind of what's saying that I'm not afraid of this virus. And we all just need to go about our business. Mother Nature does not care who you are. They don't care if you're black. They don't care if you're white. They don't care if you're Indian. They don't care if you're a man or a woman. They don't care, if you're young or old. Now it has a preference for certain, certainly older people are affected more than younger people. It doesn't care if you're Christian, Muslim, atheist, Jewish, Hindi, Buddhist. It doesn't care. It will infect you and kill you just the same. So it is something to be respected. And an article I recently read by a commentator just pointed out that natural selection, if you don't adapt, you're more likely to be selected out naturally by this virus, by Mother Nature. Okay, continuing on in the 4th paragraph. While the virus is still prevalent in our community, every social interaction is a risk-benefit calculation. Does the benefit one gains from a given interaction with another person or group of people outweigh the potential risk? The potential risk being illness and or death of oneself or another person one might infect. And keep in mind that most people are infectious prior to being symptomatic. We can't see the virus, and without adequate testing, we have no reliable process to identify and isolate these asymptomatic carriers. I think this is the attitude everybody needs to have. This is that adaptation that I'm talking about. I certainly am not advocating for us being locked down in our houses until this virus goes away. Certainly that would wreak havoc, perhaps unfixable havoc on our economy. Certainly we would start dealing with more deaths of despair, people dealing with depression, isolation, etc. So we need to start opening back up our society. People need to get back to work, but we have to be smart about it. We have to adapt. And so that's how we have to think about it. Every interaction I have, you know, if I decide that I want to get together with my family, my parents are in their 70s. They're high risk by virtue of their age and some other health issues they have. This summer in a month is their 50th wedding anniversary. You know, we had planned to go to a resort in San Antonio where they have water slides, and rent a cabana and spend a few days with them and my sisters and all the grandkids, celebrating that landmark. You know, we're not going to do that now, partially because the hotel and resort is closing down and canceled our reservation, but I don't think we had any plans of keeping that. We're trying to figure out how we can get together with them. I'm still not comfortable driving down to Houston and having us all stay in their house. They have a pool. Maybe we'll go down and my sisters and I will stay with my sister who lives in Houston. Maybe we'll erect a tent outside their house with lawn chairs and, you know, a barbecue pit, and maybe we'll go over there and celebrate that outdoors where it's safer. But I'm not prepared to go down there and expose them to this. If I pick it up at work, or I pick it up going to the grocery store, and I'm not yet symptomatic, and I go down there and I spread it, and my parents get sick and one or both of them dies from it, I don't think I could live with myself. So that's the risk benefit calculation I have to make for that interaction. And that's what each of us has to do. Every interaction, we just have to think, what is the risk benefit? You know, the biggest risk, I think, of community spread is gathering in large groups. That is where you can spread it to a lot of people who can then asymptomatically spread it to a lot more in a short period of time. That gets back to the exponential growth I talked about a couple of months ago when we spoke. Okay, I'm rambling now. So what can we do to minimize the spread in our community? We have to continue to socially isolate as much as possible. Increased interactions lead to increased new infections and increased deaths. So the more we interact with other people, the more we congregate, the more infections there's going to be, and the more people are going to die. We need to limit our interactions with others to essential activities. People need to go to work. All the workplaces, or at least ones that are smart about it, are doing everything they can to socially isolate within the workplace. I was talking to David Day about all they have to do at their business to continue working and keep people safe. You know, when we go to the grocery store now, there's an attendant at the buggies who's wiped them down for us. Everybody in the store who works there is wearing a mask. You know, when we go out, we should be wearing a mask. Now, you don't need to wear a mask when you're going for a walk in your neighborhood or exercising outdoor. The risk of this spreading in outdoor spaces is really relatively low. Now, if you're going to be up close and personal, sitting at a picnic table with a bunch of people you're not normally with, well, that might be a higher risk. But if you're just going for a walk or outside, you stop and talk to your neighbor, you know, if you stand 5-6 feet apart and you talk, the chances of infecting them in that short period of time is relatively low. Keep in mind that the greater the viral load a person receives, the greater the risk of infection. If I just breathe in, if I'm passing somebody who's got it and I breathe in a few copies of the virus and it gets in my respiratory system, most people's immune system is going to be able to handle that and take care of that, recognize it as foreign and take care of it. But if you're sitting in a room that doesn't have great ventilation and somebody's asymptomatic and they're breathing in and out, and over 30 minutes or an hour, or maybe just 15 minutes, you breathe in a large viral load, so many copies of it, that may overwhelm your immune system. The virus may take hold and start using your body to replicate and make you sick. So those are other things to keep in mind when you're, hold on, I'm gonna mute everybody. Those are things to keep in mind. But when you go to a store, if you're in a closed space with other people, please wear a mask. And true, the mask doesn't do a great job, unless you're wearing an N95 mask that's been fit tested for you to make sure that mask fits you well enough to protect you. The mask's not going to truly protect you from a large viral load. But if you're in a store, walking around, moving, not close to any one individual for a long period of time, you're probably not going to get such a large viral load through the mask that you're going to get infected. The mask will probably filter out some of that and protect you. But the main reason for wearing a mask is to protect others. If you yourself are not symptomatic, presumably you wouldn't go to a public place if you were symptomatic. But if you're not symptomatic, don't know you have the virus, and you're infectious, wearing a mask is going to have a lot of a lot of the virus travels on respiratory particles. When you breathe, when you talk, you have respiratory particles that spray out of your mouth. The virus rides on those, and that's why within 6 feet of you, someone can breathe that in. When you wear a mask, you are protecting somebody else. So, as Christians who espouse to love our neighbor and want to protect them, we should want to be wearing a mask when we go out in public. I cannot think of any good reason why we should go into a grocery store, into a place of business, in a closed space around other people, and not wear a mask if we truly believe that we want what's best for our neighbor. And understanding that we just won't know when we're sick or we're infected until it might be several days. All right. And continue to wash your hands, clean surfaces. Now, I know the CDC came out just this week and announced that further data has shown that the risk of transmission from touching it, from the virus being on a respiratory particle that settles on a surface, and then you touching your face, getting infected that way, is pretty low risk, and that's true. And I know some people think that, they've been lying to us about this. They've been telling us one thing. This is a new virus. It's a novel virus. We are learning as we go. Just because we get new guidance based on new evidence doesn't mean that somebody was misleading you, that the government was trying to deceive you. It means that we have new information and they're sharing it with you. As research is done, as studies are done, and governing agencies get information, they're going to share it with us, and we're going to learn from it. But this information that the CDC sent out here recently, that risk is low, is not new. I mean, that's been, the epidemiologists and experts that I've been listening to, and you can ask Jody, because I've been saying this all along. They've all been saying that they thought it was a low risk for it to be transmitted from surfaces, but they felt, until we know better, and I would continue to do so, better safe than sorry. Wash your hands, clean surfaces. Why take an unnecessary risk? Even if the risk of transmission is very low, why take that risk? So I would continue to take those precautions, but we don't have to be OCD about it, because it's a pretty low risk. Really, it's more breathing in the respiratory particles that somebody else who's infected is breathing out. But please don't think that you've been lied to because they're telling you something different than you thought they were telling you before. Frankly, I think all they're doing is confirming what we suspected. but the guidance you were getting before was better safe than sorry, and that's the way to proceed with this virus. Okay, so next, the third last paragraph. One of the most important things we can do is protect those in our congregation and community who are most vulnerable. High-risk populations include, and this is not new, I shared this 2 months ago, and I'm sure you're all familiar with this, those who are older than 60 years old and those with chronic illnesses such as diabetes, high blood pressure, heart disease, lung disease, malignancy, or immune deficiency. One thing, the general thought has been that young people are not getting they're having mild cases, not getting very sick. Certainly we have seen young people 20 to 50 years old in the ICU, people otherwise healthy on a ventilator. But one group of young people that we have noted more frequently ending up seriously ill and on a ventilator are those who fall into the obese category. And we're not talking about morbidly obese. We're talking about, a body mass index of 30. So you can get a calculator and calculate, what a body mass index of 30 is, but 30 to 35 is considered obese. Greater than 35 is considered morbidly obese. But really, a body mass index of 30 is not severely overweight. There's a lot of us walking around that have a BMI greater than 30, but those are young people that we've been seeing getting sick. Probably has to do with increased inflammation and the metabolic syndrome that makes their immune system less able to fight off the virus. So, and so I say among young people, 20 to 50 years old, obesity seems to be a significant risk factor for serious illness. Serious illness defined as requiring ICU admission or mechanical ventilation. And if you're not familiar with what mechanical ventilation is, it's a form of life support. It's where we put a breathing tube down your throat and hook you up to a machine that breathes for you. It's when your lungs can't adequately oxygenate and ventilate, get the oxygen into your blood and the carbon dioxide out of your blood. It's a form of life support. And it seems that about 50% of people who end up on a ventilator do not survive. I know some of the data out of New York City indicated that that they had an 80% mortality of people on the ventilator. Here in Dallas at Baylor Scott and White, I think this percentage is 47% mortality of people who end up on a ventilator. I think the reason we saw such a high number in New York City was because they were simply overwhelmed. They weren't prepared. The way we were initially treating people with the ventilator probably wasn't the best way for this virus, but we just didn't know. So the ventilator itself was probably doing some harm, which is a risk anytime somebody goes on a ventilator. Ventilators are harmful to lungs. We do our best to minimize that, but we can't avoid it altogether. So it seems like probably about a 50% risk of dying if you end up on a ventilator. So the next paragraph, so a large percentage of our membership at Webb Chapel falls into at least one of these high-risk groups. So ultimately, I recommended to the elders, and they were in agreement at this point, that returning to corporate worship would potentially increase the spread of the virus in our community and expose our vulnerable members to the virus, both of which could lead to avoidable and preventable deaths. So that's why at the current time, I just don't think it's wise that we go back to congregating to worship. The virus is still prevalent in our society. We've not had a 2-week period of consistent downward trends. We will see an occasional drop in new cases, a drop in deaths, but they're frequently followed by another rise. We'll just have to follow this over more time to see if the prevalence starts to drop. But remember, if it's still out there in our community and people are being exposed to it at work, in other essential activities, shopping at the store, meeting with family, and we congregate with a high-risk group of people, singing spreads those particles quite a bit, especially if you're not wearing a mask. We can infect a lot of people at our church. Those people could then in turn go community before we even know it happened. Read any of the papers today. As you know, Germany was one of the first countries to start opening things back up. They're pretty regimented in Germany, pretty strict about their rules. A church that was following their guidelines, a Baptist church in Germany, has been linked to an outbreak there. 40 members of the congregation got sick. 3 people have been hospitalized so far. So it's not a theoretical risk. It's a real risk. I think every congregation has to figure out their own risk benefit ratio. You know, I would recommend any congregation sit tight, continue to meet remotely, support its members any way it can until we see how this plays out as society is opening back up. Because I don't think, at this point in time, I don't think exercising our right to congregate is worth any member of our community or any member of our congregation's death if it's preventable. And don't get me wrong, I'm all for the president and the governor and the county commissioner saying churches have the right to meet. I just wish more churches took this very seriously and understood the risks and benefits and saw this more as an opportunity to love and protect their neighbor as opposed to an opportunity to exercise their right. I think that's a dangerous attitude to have. One more thought before we start opening it up to questions. I had it in my mind, now I forgot. It'll probably come back to me. So looks like we've got 9 questions. Let's see. All right. So Jason asked, are the number of cases rising in Dallas, decreasing? Thanks. So like I said, if you follow the trends, at the moment, it looks like over the last couple of weeks, we've probably, we're flattened out. Whether we are decreasing or that's going to rise again as there's more social interaction, we'll just have to see. But at the moment, it looks fairly flat. I know at the hospitals where I work in Plano, we had 3 cases in the ICU when I left about a week and a half ago. There's now 6. 3 of the people that were on ventilators then are still on ventilators. Yet remains to be seen how those people are going to do. So certainly we have no evidence that it's decreasing. It seems to have flattened, but it certainly could rise again. Stacy Carroll asked, if a person has tested positive for IgM antibodies but has been asymptomatic, how concerned should you be about them having been contagious at some point? Should people living with them be self-quarantining, and to what extent? Okay, well, so about the antibody test. So there's 2 kinds of antibodies. There's IgM antibodies, which usually become positive early. So you usually, while you are still sick, your immune system will form IgM antibodies, and that's helping you fight off the initial infection. As you get better, the IgM antibodies will decline, and your body will develop IgG antibodies, which are sort of lying in wait to help protect you from the next time your body the virus is introduced to your body. Now, my understanding was most of the tests we have available right now are only testing for IgG antibodies. I wasn't aware that there was a test out there readily available testing for IgM antibodies. If there is one and you have IgM antibodies, certainly you should probably alert people that you've been around that, hey, I may have been infected, and consider, staying away from other people or taking extra precautions, or maybe get tested. Now, one little interesting fact about statistics and these tests that I learned from this, maybe I knew it at one point in time, but I certainly had forgotten it. When you have something like this virus that is, there's a low prevalence among our entire population that has been infected. At this point, best guess is 3 to 5% of the US population has been infected. The lower the prevalence in a community, the higher the false positive rate of a test that tests for antibodies. So at this point, there with a 5% prevalence of people who have been infected, not necessarily people who are currently infected, but people who have been infected, you might have a false positive test from IgG antibodies as high as 70%. I was going to go get the antibody test until I learned that, which I confirmed with some infectious disease doctors I know at UT Southwestern. I realized that if I go and get tested and I test positive, there's a good chance that that's a false positive. The more prevalent, the more people that have been infected in a community, then the false positive rate goes down and that test is more accurate. I hope that answers your question. Jason asked, does hand sanitizer kill the virus? It does. I can't remember exactly how long it takes. I think alcohol, hand sanitizer is basically alcohol. I think alcohol kills the virus relatively quickly. Different things that you use to clean it take a little bit longer, especially on surfaces. But 30 seconds to a few minutes will usually clean things. I think hand sanitizer on your hands kills it relatively quickly. David Day asks, Jed, what are your thoughts on corporate temperature taking? With it being only one of 7 primary symptoms of COVID, do you see as a benefit? Sure. I don't think it's an unreasonable thing to do. I don't know how easily it's done to stop and take everyone's temperature, and then you have to decide what your cutoff is going to be. It's certainly, if someone shows up and they've got 100.0 temperature, you wouldn't want them joining any group that you're a part of. I think a lot of the cutoffs have been 99.5, 99.6. But once again, it's not foolproof, but it's another piece of the puzzle. I do think without readily available accurate testing, the best thing we can do is continue to, when we're around other people, wear masks. Don't be around people if we're symptomatic. And even when you're around other people, continue to give each other your space. Stay 6 feet apart, even when you're wearing a mask. Carol Hames asks, I know that there is no way to know for sure, but what guesstimate do you have about when this virus will mutate or a cure or vaccine will be developed? Basically, how long are you estimating for this to play out? Once again, we don't know. We don't know the exact answer. In my mind, and that's what I tell everybody, I think this is going to be with us for a year or two in some way, shape, or form. I think we are going to have to, we're not going back to living like we were in January and February. I don't think for a year or two, until it mutates and once we see this, the prevalence, the fewer cases not coming, until we see the epidemiology showing us that it's just not really out there in our community very prevalently. People aren't getting infected very much. People aren't dying. Or we have an effective treatment, or we have a vaccine that works. We just have to wait. So my best guess is, we're probably talking about a year or two of living differently than we did. And we'll probably, kind of like 9/11. I mean, think about how 9/11 changed our lives when it comes to like airport security and going to large sporting events. You go through a metal detector every time you go someplace where a lot of people are gathered, or you go to an airport, or you go to a public building. I think we're going to be skittish for a while, and probably rightly so. But when will it be safe to go back meeting as a congregation? I think we're just going to have to continue to monitor the situation and do that risk-benefit calculation. David Day, do you feel it's safe for people to return to hospitals for elective or necessary procedures? I think hospitals, in general, yes. Like I said, hospitals have now had the time to prepare themselves and are very cautious. If you're coming from a high risk environment, I think most hospitals are going to test you. If you show up with any symptom, if there's any suspicion that your symptoms could be related to COVID, you're going to get a test. And you're going to get isolated initially. We have some at Baylor where we work. We have the Abbott test that comes back in 10 minutes. I know there was some information in the media that test wasn't very accurate. It depended on how you collected it. The way we collected it correlated pretty well with the send-off test. So we do both in the emergency room, or anytime we need to do a test quickly, we do the Abbott test. But if our suspicion is high enough, we do isolate those patients, do another test, a send-off test in 24 hours, just to confirm that negative test. If you come to most hospitals now, before you have elective surgery, you're going to be screened and you're going to get a test. At my hospital, you've got to be seen in a pre-admit clinic 48 hours before your surgery, and they're going to test you. You have to have a negative test 48 hours before you have surgery. So I think if you have a surgery that you need to have done, then I think it's probably safe. If you've got some cosmetic surgery that you want to have, that you don't really have to have, well, I might put that off. But if you need it and it's elective, you need a hip or a knee or some other joint replacement, something that's affecting your quality of life, I think you can safely go back. I think the necessary precautions are in place to minimize your risk of getting infected and minimize your risk of infecting those taking care of you. Roger Daw, at 250 new cases per day in Dallas County, how close were hospitals to being overwhelmed? Not close. I mean, hospitals slowed way down. Hospitals are in financial straits right now. I can't remember the exact number, but I know Baylor is. I heard at one point in time that the Baylor Scott and White system may have lost $1 billion over the last couple of months, and so that's one reason why they're very motivated to get elective procedures going again. I mean, several things happened. We got rid of elective procedures, which is a big part of any hospital's business, in outpatient procedures and inpatient procedures, and people stopped coming to the hospital. I mean, people stayed at home. People stayed at home and who would have come to the emergency room otherwise. Some who may normally not need to come to the emergency room and did okay not coming. And some people sat at home and probably had strokes and heart attacks that will be to their detriment down the road. But people didn't come to the hospital. So hospitals slowed way down. It was truly a blessing because it gave us the opportunity to really solidify our processes to protect ourselves and to protect other patients. But it was a major hit on hospitals. So we didn't, in the Dallas area, we came nowhere close to overwhelming our hospitals. I'm more fearful of getting overwhelmed now as people are coming back to the hospital for routine care. We're increasing elective cases, and we've opened things back up, and some people are socially isolating, some people socially distancing, some people are not. A lot of churches are starting to meet back. So we could see a big influx of COVID patients and start stressing the limits of the hospital system again. But we haven't been overwhelmed thus far. Kathy Crenshaw. Oh yeah, thank you for reminding me, Kathy. You emailed this to me. What about those people who say masks are dangerous because of breathing in your own CO2? Okay, that's not a risk. These masks are not. Most of the masks that you're wearing walking around town that you've made yourself, or surgical type masks that you got, these masks are not. You're breathing oxygen in and carbon dioxide out, and you're not rebreathing much CO2. I mean, keep in mind that everybody in an operating room all day long wears a mask like that. Surgeons, nurses that work in the operating room, they wear these masks all day long. Everybody in a hospital now is wearing a mask all the time when they're in the hospital. When I'm in the hospital, I wear a mask the whole time. All the nurses wear a mask all day, every day. So that's not something to worry about. Even the N95 mask, they keep out 95% of particles, but they allow air to move in and out. You can breathe just fine. Now, certainly if somebody has advanced heart or lung disease and the increased resistance of the air movement could be problematic for people like that. But for the average Joe walking around with normal lungs and a normal heart, it's not going to be a problem. And if you've got that bad a heart or that bad of lungs, then you probably ought to just stay home and not be out somewhere where you're wearing a mask. From Don Berthel, a friend of mine in Europe is telling me that they are undressing at the door before entering and immediately washing them after being out. Is that something we need to be doing? I don't think that's necessary. I mean, I will try and change my scrubs before I come home from being in the hospital. When I've been in and out of the COVID unit and around people who have it. But keep in mind, when I'm in the COVID unit, I've got a hat on my head. I'm wearing goggles. I've got an N95 mask. I've got a gown. I've got 2 sets of gloves on. So my clothes are pretty well protected. And once again, like the CDC said, studies show that the risk of transmitting this is primarily by breathing things in, not so much from touching something that's had it on it. So I think if you've just been out in the community, I don't think you do that. If you're a healthcare worker working in a place where you might be exposed to it a lot, I think it's a reasonable thing to do to take an extra precaution. It's not going to hurt anybody, but it's probably not necessary if you're just out in the community. Jeff Bear, okay, says, do you want to ask? Let me see, Jeff. Let me find you and I'll unmute you if you want to ask a question. Hold on. Here, you ask a question down here for a second. Hold on. Can we all not worship together at church with masks and stay 6 feet apart? Because I don't feel like we're a family now. That's a good question. I think at the moment that would be difficult to do, because once again, these masks are not perfect. And what the problem is that even when you're wearing a mask, what you're breathing could be coming out the sides. If you coughed, if you sneezed, you're going to be sitting in a pew, even though they might be 6 feet apart. Somebody might be sitting in front of you. You could still be spreading quite a bit of viral load in their direction. And, just like in restaurants, studies have shown that people sitting on the other side of the restaurant got infected from somebody sitting on one side because the air conditioning was causing those respiratory droplets to travel to the other side of the restaurant. Someone infected here at this table did not infect the people sitting at the table next to them, but they infected the people sitting over here because the air conditioning blew it over there. We could do that, but once again, I think when we do that risk-benefit calculation, and we keep in mind the number of at-risk people we have at Webb Chapel, it'd be a high risk at this point, with the prevalence still so high in our community. But I certainly recognize that our how we feel as a family is limited and it's challenging. And I think the more we can do to try and figure out ways to be together without all being together, is important. Maybe that means, I know our small group has been, I found that our small group on Zoom has been very productive. I feel closer now to the people in my small group, just meeting on Zoom. We got together and did the caravans. I think a small group of people could meet outside somewhere at a park and keep their distance and have some time together. I just think right now gathering in a large group is the biggest risk. It's the biggest risk, even wearing masks, because we're in a confined space for a long period of time, and I think that risk is highest. You know, if you're outdoors in a smaller group, it may be a little bit safer, but from my perspective, I'm not willing to take that chance. I love everybody too much to take that chance, and I know it. You know, we have to separate ourselves a little bit from the emotion um, to make hard decisions like that. But it doesn't take away the pain and suffering some of us are feeling by not being together as a group on Sunday mornings, Sunday nights, Wednesday nights, and other times. Stacy Carroll asked, I have not seen the results from the test. Maybe he tested positive for IgG and then he miscommunicated IgM to his roommate, my daughter's fiance. Like I said, most of the tests I'm aware of are IgG. It could be IgM. I just hadn't been aware of it. Mitzi Thompson, will a hot summer help kill the virus? We don't know for sure. We hope. I mean, maybe the fact that in the summertime more people are outdoors, although in Texas people tend to go indoors more when it gets really hot. But how will the heat and the climate affect the virus? We don't know. We can only speculate. I wouldn't assume anything at this point. We'll just have to wait and see. And if it goes away in the summer, we just have to be concerned that it may come back in the fall or the winter. So once again, it's just we have to be vigilant and cautious. You know, if we find that we can come back towards the middle or end of the summer and gather together, taking every precaution, wearing masks, even when we're singing, you know, we'll have to watch closely. And if we start seeing the number of cases rise, you know, it might be wise to go back to meeting remotely again. We'll just have to see. David Day, what are expectations there are for better treatments, not a vaccine, something like Tamiflu for COVID? I think the answer is the same as for the previous question. We'll just have to wait and see. I'm somewhat pessimistic about that. Like I said, I think we're probably, I probably think, and I hope I'm wrong. I think this virus is just going to have to run its course, mutate into something less deadly, and become maybe something we see seasonally that's more like the flu, that's not as overwhelming, you know, and maybe we'll slowly build up some immunity. Maybe they'll get a virus that works kind of like the flu virus works. But as far as a treatment like Tamiflu, time will tell. Time will tell. I wouldn't count on anything. Okay. Oh, I think I remembered what I was going to say before. The thing I was going to mention was about herd immunity. So if you think about, like I said, most studies that have been done, it seems like in general across the country, some places the prevalence is higher, but those that have been infected by this and are now immune to it are probably in the 3 to 5% range about now. In New York City, New York State, it's a lot higher than that. But in places like Dallas, where you know we haven't been overrun with it, but it's been here, it's probably more like 3 to 5% of our population. Herd immunity requires, we think, about 60% of the population being immune to it. If that occurs naturally, if we just do the math and extrapolate 5% to 60%, and we take the number of deaths we have now in our country, now at 100,000, to get from 5% to 60%, we've gone to 1.2 million deaths, if that is a linear thing. So, you know, to get to herd immunity naturally, we run the risk of losing a million plus people in our country. And I don't think anybody wants to take that risk and just open things up 100%, everybody go about their business without masks, without socially distancing, etc. Okay, I think that's all the questions. Does anybody else have anything they wanna? Oh, hold on, Paul Cartwright. It was so good to see everyone here on the Zoom meeting. I have to run on now, Jed. Thanks for sharing your wealth of medical knowledge with us. God bless you and your sweet family with this son. Maybe everybody already saw that. Carol's texting something to everybody else. I guess you can see that. Thank you. Can we all pray together? Sure. Would one of our elders want to lead a prayer? I see Steve staring right at me. If I unmute you, would you lead us in a prayer?
Sure.
All right. You're unmuted.
Father, we are so thankful that we could gather today, even this way. It's gives us such great joy to see each other, to know that we're doing well, to reassure one another, to have Jed with his expertise and knowledge and experience to guide us in our medical thinking, along with our spiritual guidance. Father, we are grateful that we have those who have questions of concern that can be addressed. And we ask, Father, above all things, that we realize that you have this in your hands, that we know that you will take care of it, that it's our patience and understanding that will need a little bit of work, and that we ask, Father, that you give us those things. Help us be wise in the things that we do, in the people that we are with, and in the way that we are with them. Help us to do our part to take care of those in our congregation who might be at greater risk. And help us to be prayerful every day, thoughtful of one another, and be extremely good servants to each other as we go through this. Father, we're thankful for the way that we can worship right now, for the opportunity to get to take the Lord's Supper together, to sing and to pray. Even though we may be apart, we are still together because we are your family at Webb Chapel. Thank you again, Father, for Jed and his ability to be able to do what he does, to keep himself and his family safe, to keep us safe, and to help be one of those important things that guides us in our decision making. Father, be with everybody today, be with us tomorrow. Help us to think about those who have given their life in our service so that we can be free to do the things that we do. In Christ's name, amen.